Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. This is the Coastal Landscapes and Change detailed revision overview over here on my channel. I've gone through the whole of the coast specification already, so I'll link the playlist up here if you haven't seen it already. But today we're going to be going over probably 45-50 minutes of pure coasts all in one video so that you find it all in one place instead of having to watch loads of different little videos. So subscribe down below if you think this is useful. I'm uploading just the basics, so 10, 15, 20 minutes of just the basics of coasts sometime in the future. So subscribe down below so that you don't miss that. And without further ado, let's just get straight on into this video. Classifying coasts. The coast can be considered as an open system as it receives inputs from outside the system and transfers outputs away from the coast and into other systems. These systems may be terrestrial, atmospheric or oceanic and can include rock, water and carbon cycles. Whilst coasts are open systems, throughout this topic you'll be expected to consider a coast as a closed system. In some circumstances, such as during scientific research and coastline management planning. Sediment cells. Coasts can be split into sections called sediment cells. These are typically considered a closed system in terms of sediment. There are 11 sediment cells along the coast of England and Wales. Sources, where the sediment originates from. The through flows are the movement of sediment along the shore through longshore drift. And sinks are locations where deposition of sediment dominates. Under normal conditions, the coastal system operates in a state of dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic equilibrium in a sediment cell is where inputs and outputs of sediment are in a constant state of change but remain in balance. Physical and human actions can change this equilibrium. Sediment cells are not fully closed systems, so it's important to remember that actions within one cell may affect another. Feedback loops. The coastal system has mechanisms that enhance changes within a system, taking it away from dynamic equilibrium, or mechanisms which balance changes, taking the system back towards equilibrium. Negative feedback loops. This lessens any amount of change that has occurred within a system. For example, a storm could erode a large amount of a beach, taking the beach out of dynamic equilibrium, as there is a larger input of sediment into the system than output. A negative feedback loop will balance this excess of inputted sediment. When the destructive waves from a storm lose their energy, excess sediment is deposited as an offshore bar. The bar dissipates when the wave's energy protects the beach from further erosion. Over time, the bar gets eroded instead of the beach. Once the bar has gone, normal conditions ensue and the system goes back to dynamic equilibrium. Positive feedback. This exaggerates the change being made within the system, making the system more unstable and taking it away from dynamic equilibrium. People walking over sand dunes destroys vegetation growing there and causes erosion. As the roots from the vegetation have been holding the sand dunes together, damaging the vegetation makes the sand dunes more susceptible to erosion. This increases the rate of erosion. Eventually the sand dunes will be completely eroded, leaving more of the beach open to erosion, taking the beach further away from dynamic equilibrium. The littoral zone. The littoral zone is an area of the coast where land is subject to wave action. It is constantly changing and varies due to short-term factors like tides and storm surges, and long-term factors like changes in sea level and climate change. There are several subzones within the littoral zone. Backshore is the area above high tide and is only affected by exceptionally high tides. The foreshore, this is the area of land where most wave processes occur. And the offshore, the open sea. Valentine's classification. Valentine's classification describes the range of coastlines that can occur. An advancing coastline may be due to the land emerging or deposition being the prominent process. Alternatively, a coastline may be retreating due to the land submerging or erosion becoming the prominent process. Emergent or submergent coastlines may be due to post-glacial adjustment. The land wobbles as a glacier above it melts, causing isostatic sea level change, as well as other causes. Coastal processes and landforms. Erosional processes. Erosion is a collaborative process which involves the removal of sediment from a coastline by different types of erosion, not one type acting by itself. The main processes of erosion are corrosion. Sand and pebbles are picked up by the sea from an offshore sediment sink or temporal store and hurled against the cliffs at high tide, causing the cliffs to be eroded. The shape, size, weight and quantity of sediment picked up, as well as the wave speed, affects the erosive power of this process. Abrasion. This is the process where sediment is moved along the shoreline, causing it to be worn down over time. Theoretically, if a watermelon was being eroded, the corrosion would be throwing stones at it, and abrasion will be rubbing the stones against the skin of the watermelon. Both will cause damage to the watermelon at the same time. Attrition. Wave action causes rocks and pebbles to hit against each other, wearing each other down and so become round and eventually smaller. Attrition is an erosive process within the coastal environment but has little to no effect on erosion of the coastline itself. Hydraulic action. As a wave crashes into a rock or cliff face, air is forced into cracks, joints and faults within the rock. High pressure causes the cracks to force apart and widen. When the wave retreats, the air expands. Over time, this causes the rock to fracture. Bubbles found within the water may implode under high pressure, creating tiny jets of water that over time erode rock. This erosive process is called cavitation. Corrosion solution. The mildly acidic seawater can cause alkaline rocks such as limestone to be eroded and is very similar to the process of carbonation weathering. This is a potential link with the carbon cycle, global warming and coasts. Will increases in rainwater and ocean acidity increase coastal erosion, or will the effects be negligible? Wave quarrying. This is when breaking waves that hit the cliff face exert a pressure up to 30 tonnes per metre squared. It is very similar to hydraulic action, but acts with significantly more pressure to directly pull away rocks from a cliff face or remove smaller weathered fragments. The force of the breaking wave hammers the rock surface, shaking and weakening it, and leaving it open to attack from hydraulic action and abrasion. Erosion rates are highest when waves are high and have a long fetch, when waves approach the coast at a perpendicular angle to the cliff. At high tide, waves travel higher up the cliff, so a bigger area of the cliff is able to be eroded. When heavy rainfall occurs, water percolates through permeable rock, weakening the cliff. And in winter, destructive waves are at the largest and most destructive during winter. Vulnerability to erosion. The resistance of a rock will determine its vulnerability to erosion and is influenced by various factors, such as whether a rocks are clasticine or crystalline. Sedimentary rocks like sandstone are clastic and they are made up of cemented sediment particles, therefore are vulnerable to erosion, whereas igneous and metamorphic rocks are made up of interlocking crystals, making them more resistant to erosion. The amount of cracks, fractures and fissures. The more weaknesses there are in the rock, the more it is open to erosional processes, especially hydraulic action. The lithology of the rock greatly influences the vulnerability to erosion. Erosional landforms. Caves, arches, stacks and stumps. This sequence occur on pinnacle headlands. Marine erosion widens faults at the base of a headland, widening over time to create a cave. The cave will widen on both sides due to marine erosion and subaerial processes, eroding through to the other side of the headland, creating an arch. The arch will continue to widen until it is unable to support itself, falling under its own weight through mass movement, leaving a stack as one side of the arch becomes detached from the mainland. With marine erosion attacking the base of the stack, eventually the stack will collapse into a stump. Wave-cut notch and platform. Marine erosion attacks the base of a cliff, creating a notch of eroded material between high tide height and low tide height. As the notch becomes deeper and subaerial weathering weakens the cliff from the top, the cliff face becomes unstable and falls under its own weight through mass movement. This leaves behind a platform of unaffected cliff base beneath the wave-cut notch. Retreating cliffs. Through the process of repeat wave-cut notches and platforms, new cliff faces are created, whilst the land retreats. Blowholes. A blowhole is a combination of two features: a pothole on top of a cliff created by chemical weathering, and a cave formed by marine erosion. As the cave erodes deeper into the cliff, the pothole deepens. They may meet. In this case, a channel is created for incoming waves to travel up and hit the cliff face. Occasionally, water splashes out of the top of the blowhole when energetic waves hit the cliff face. Transport and deposition. Longshore drift. Sediment is predominantly transported along the coast through the process of longshore drift. It transports sediment along the beach and between sediment cells. Waves hit the beach at an angle determined by the direction of the prevailing wind. The waves push sediment in this direction and up the beach in the swash. Due to gravity, the wave then carries the sediment back down the beach in the backwash. This moves sediment along the beach over time. It is one of the reasons why when swimming in the sea, you may move along the coast in a particular direction. Other processes of transportation include traction, which carries large, heavy sediment which rolls along the seabed being pushed by currents. Saltation carries smaller sediment which bounces along the seabed, again being pushed by currents. Suspension. Small sediment is carried within the water column, and solution, dissolved material, is carried within the water. The effectiveness of transportation. The impacts of transportation depend on the severity of the angle that the waves come into the land. Swash aligned. Wave crests approach parallel to the coast, so there is limited longshore drift. Sediment doesn't travel far up the beach. Drift aligned. Waves approach at a significant angle, so longshore drift causes the sediment to travel far up the beach. Likelihood of deposition. Deposition occurs when waves lose energy, meaning the sediment becomes too heavy to carry. Deposition tends to be gradual and a continuous process. A wave won't drop all of its fine sediment at once. Gravity settling. The wave's energy becomes very low, and so heavy rocks and boulders are deposited, followed by the next heaviest sediment. Flocculation. Clay particles clump together due to chemical attraction and then sink due to their high density. Depositional landforms. Spits. A spit is a long narrow strip of land formed due to deposition. Longshore drift occurs along a coastline, but as a wave loses its energy, normally going into a sheltered area, such as behind a headland, they deposit their sediment. Over time, this creates a spit. Periodically, the prevailing wind will change direction, causing a hook to appear. Over time, the sheltered area behind a spit can turn into a salt marsh. The length of a spit is influenced by the surrounding currents or rivers. Bars. A spit which over time crosses a bay, linking up two sections of coast. The water within the bay is therefore called a lagoon. A tombolo. A tombolo is a bar or beach that connects the mainland to an offshore island and is formed due to wave refraction off the coastal island, reducing wave velocity, leading to deposition of sediments. They may be covered at high tide if they are low-lying. Cuspate forelands. These only occur within triangular-shaped headlands. Longshore drift along each side of the headland will create beaches, which, where they meet, will form a cuspate foreland. Offshore bars. A region offshore where sand is deposited, as waves don't have enough energy to carry the sediment to shore. They can be found as the waves break early, scouring the seabed and instantly depositing its sediment as a loose sediment offshore bar. Sand dunes. Sand dunes occur when prevailing winds blow sediment to the back of the beach, and therefore the formation of dunes requires large quantities of sand and a large tidal range. This allows the sand to dry, so that it is light enough to be picked up and carried by the wind to the back of the beach. Frequent and strong onshore winds are also necessary. The dunes develop as a process of vegetation succession. Embryo dunes. The upper beach where sand starts to accumulate around a small obstacle. Yellow dunes. As more sand accumulates, the dune grows. Vegetation may develop on the upper and back dune surfaces, which stabilise the dune, the tallest of the dune succession. Grey dunes. Sand develops into soil with lots of moisture and nutrients, as vegetation dies, enabling more varied plant growth. Dune slack. The water table rises close to the surface, or water is trapped between the hollows between dunes during storms, allowing the development of moisture-loving plants such as willow grass. Heath and woodland. Sandy soils develop as there is a greater nutrients content, allowing for brackish plants to survive. Trees will also grow, such as willow, birch, oak trees, within the coastal woodland, becoming a natural windbreak to the mainland behind. The stability of depositional landforms. Depositional landforms consist of unconsolidated sediment and are therefore vulnerable to change. During major storms, large amounts of sediment can be deposited or transported elsewhere, removing a landform from one region of the sediment cell. Depositional landforms depend on a continuous supply of sediment to balance erosion, which may see some landforms changed as their dynamic equilibrium shifts. Subaerial weathering processes, weathering and mass movement. Weathering is the breakdown of rocks over time, leading to the transfer of material into the littoral zone, where it becomes an input to sediment cells. Mechanical weathering, the breakdown of rocks due to an exertion of physical forces without any chemical changes taking place. Freeze-thaw or frost shattering. Water enters cracks in the rock and then the water freezes overnight during the winter. As it freezes, water expands by about 10% in volume, which increases the pressure acting on the rock, causing cracks to develop. Over time, these cracks grow, weakening the cliff and making it more vulnerable to the processes of erosion. Salt crystallization. As seawater evaporates, salt is left behind. Salt crystals will also grow over time, exerting pressure onto the rock, which forces the cracks to widen. Salt can also corrode ferrous materials containing iron rock due to chemical reactions. Wetting and drying. Rocks such as clay expand when wet and then contract again when they're drying. The frequent cycles of wetting and drying at the coast can cause these rocks and cliffs to break up. Chemical weathering. The breakdown of rocks through chemical reactions. There are different types of chemical weathering. Carbonation. Rainwater absorbs CO2 from the air to create a weak carbonic acid, which then reacts with calcium carbonate in the rock to form calcium bicarbonate, which can then be easily dissolved. Acid rain reacts with limestone to form calcium bicarbonate, which is then easily dissolved, allowing erosion. Oxidation. When minerals become exposed to the air through cracks and fissures, the mineral will become oxidized and will increase its volume, contributing to the mechanical weathering, causing the rocks to crumble. The most common oxidation within rocks is iron materials becoming iron oxide, turning the rocks a rusty orange after being exposed to air. Solution. When rock minerals such as rock salt are dissolved. Biological weathering. The breakdown of rocks due to the actions of plants, bacteria and animals. Plant roots. Roots of plants growing into the cracks of rocks which exert pressure, eventually splitting the rocks. Birds. Some birds, such as puffins, dig burrows into cliffs, weakening them and making erosion more likely. Rock boring. Many species of clams secrete chemicals that dissolve rocks, and piddocks may burrow into the rock face. Seaweed acids. Some seaweeds contain pockets of sulfuric acid, which, if hit against a rock or cliff face, the acid will dissolve some of the rock's minerals. Decaying vegetation. Water that flows through decaying vegetation and then over coastal areas will be acidic, thus causing chemical weathering. Mass movement. There are also several types of mass movement, which tend to be determined by the weight of the sediment and its ability to flow downhill. The types of mass movement that occurs depends on the angle of the slope, the rock's lithology and geology, the vegetation cover on the cliff face, and the saturation of the ground and previous weather patterns. There are two different categories of mass movement, slide and flow. For a slide, sediment keeps its same place within the whole material, simply moves downhill. However, for a flow, all the material flows down and mixes. Flows include soil creep, the slowest but continuous form of mass movement involving the movement of soil particles downhill. Solifluction occurs mainly in tundra areas where the land is frozen, as the top layers thaw during summer, but the lower layers still stay frozen due to a permafrost. The surface layers flows over the frozen layers. Mud flows. The increase of the water content of soil can reduce friction, leading to earth and mud to flow over the underlying bedrock. Slides include rockfalls, occur on slope cliffs over 40 degrees when exposed to mechanical weathering. Rock slides. Water between joints and bedding planes, which are parallel to the cliff face, can reduce friction and lead to more sliding. And slumps. These occur when the soil is saturated with water, causing a rotational movement of soft materials such as clay and sand, forming rotational scars and terraced cliff profiles. Vulnerability to subaerial processes. Temperature and climate can influence the prominent processes of weathering. In colder climates, mechanical weathering is more common, whereas in warmer climates, chemical weathering is more common. Landforms of mass movement. Cliff profiles. Cliff profiles are influenced by many factors, but two main characteristics that dominate are the resistance of the rock to erosion and the dip in the rock strata in relation to the sea. Many cliff coastlines are composite. They have different rock layers, which makes explaining cliff profiles very complex. Cliff profiles due to solifluction, rock falls, rock slides and slumping. Concordant coastlines. Concordant coastlines are where the rock strata run parallel to the coast. The rock type varies between different concordant coasts and normally consists of bands of more resistant and less resistant rock. For example, limestone may run in parallel bands with clays and sands. These different types of rock can lead to different landforms due to erosion. Concordant coastlines can lead to the formation of Dalmatian coastlines, where a rise in sea levels led to the flooded, widened valleys between tall headlands. The headlands become islands running perpendicular to the mainland. Half coasts are also dependent on a concordant coastline, where large bays are crossed by spits, creating extensive lagoons. Discordant coastlines. This is where the rock strata run perpendicular to the sea, which creates successions of headlands and bays. Less resistant rocks are eroded faster than the more resistant rocks, which lead to the formation of bays. Headlands and bays have some effect on income waves and can cause wave refraction. Wave refraction is the process by which waves in turn lose their energy around a headland or on uneven coastlines. The wave energy is focused on the headlands, creating erosive features in these areas. The energy is dissipated in bays, leading to the formation of features associated with lower energy environments such as beaches. Coastal vegetation. Rocks and sediment play a very important role in influencing the shape of a coastal landscape. However, vegetation is essential in stabilising a landform from further change. Vegetation helps to stabilise coastal sediment in many ways. Roots of plants bind soil together, which helps to reduce erosion. When completely submerged, plants provide a protective layer for the ground, and so the ground is less easily eroded. Plants reduce the wind speed at the surface, less wind erosion occurs. Plants grow in different coastal environments and are either halophytes or xerophytes. Xerophytes are plants that are tolerant to dry conditions, and halophytes or brackish are plants that are tolerant to salty conditions. Plant succession. Plant succession is a long-term change in the plant community in an area. On coasts where there is a supply of sediment and deposition occurs, pioneer plants begin to grow in bare mud and sand. Due to the salty conditions, only certain plants can grow there. As more deposition occurs, the vegetation dies and releases nutrients into the sand, and this reduces the saltiness of the soil, which means different plant species can start to grow there. These processes continue over time, allowing new species of plants to colonise. Marram grass is a very good example of a pioneer plant. It is tough and flexible and can cope with being blasted with sand. It has adapted to reduce water loss through transpiration, and their roots grow up to 3 metres deep and can tolerate temperatures of up to 60 degrees centigrade. Salt marsh succession. Algal stage. Gutweed and blue-green algae establish as they can grow on bare mud, which their roots help to bind together. The pioneer stage. Cordgrass and glasswort grow. Their roots begin to stabilise the mud, allowing an estuarine to grow. Establishment stage. Salt marsh grass and sea asters grow, creating a carpet of vegetation, and so the height of the salt marsh increases. Stabilisation. Sea thrift, scurvy grass and sea lavender grow, and so rarely ever get submerged beneath the marsh. Climax vegetation. Rush, sedge and red fescue grass grow since the salt marsh is only submerged once or twice a year. Waves and sea levels. High energy and low energy coastlines. When answering questions in your exam, it's expected that you'll know about the different processes and landforms that may occur in high and low energy environments. High energy coastlines are associated with more powerful waves, so occur in areas where there is a large fetch. They typically have rocky headlands and landforms, and fairly frequent destructive waves. As a result, these coastlines are often eroding as the rate of erosion exceeds the rate of deposition. Lower energy coastlines have less powerful waves and occur in sheltered areas where constructive waves prevail, and as a result, these are fairly sandy areas. There are landforms of deposition as the rates of deposition exceeds the rate of erosion. The size of a wave depends on various factors, including the strength of the wind, how long the wind has been blowing for, the water depth, and the distance of fetch. There are two types of wave. Constructive waves have a strong swash, a weak backwash, low wave height, long wavelength, low frequency, and are depositional. And then the other type of wave is a destructive wave, which has a strong backwash, a weak swash, high wave height, short wavelength, high frequency, and is erosional. Over the course of time, the waves hitting a beach can vary. In summer, constructive waves dominate, but destructive waves dominate in winter. Constructive waves may turn into destructive waves as a storm begins. Climate change could mean that the UK is more susceptible and more stormy, leading to an increase in destructive waves. Dams prevent sediment being transported from rivers and entering into the coastal area, which could mean erosion would increase. Interference with natural processes along the coast through human activity could affect sediment supply across a coastal area. Sea level change. Sea levels change on a long-term basis or a short-term basis. Short-term sea level change can be because of high and low tide, a daily phenomena due to the gravitational pull of the moon. Wind strength and direction. These can cause a change in sea levels for a couple of minutes or longer. And atmospheric pressure. The lower the pressure, the higher the sea levels. Isostatic, localised sea level change. Isostatic sea level change could be due to post-glacial adjustment. Glaciers weigh down the land beneath, and so the land subsidises until it melts. For example, post-glacial adjustment for the UK after the Ice Age caused southern England to subside about 1 millimetre per year, and Scotland to rebound and increase of about 1.55 millimetres a year. Tectonic activity, such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, may cause land subsidence, therefore increasing isostatic sea level change. Eustatic rise. Global sea level change. Eustatic rise is due to thermal expansion. Water expands when it gets warmer, and so the volume of water increases as a result, which as a result, sea level increases. This is due to global warming. However, predicting sea level change is very difficult because various factors could affect changes, and the cause still isn't fully understood. Risks to coastal environments. Coastalisation is the movement of people towards the coast. Despite having high flood risks, many people move to the coast due to tourism, high-yield agricultural lands, or housing pressure. Coastalisation can increase the environmental vulnerability of these locals to flooding due to storm surges. Storm surges. A surge occurs where there is a short-term change in sea level, which may be due to a low pressure during a depression or a tropical cyclone. Subsidence of the land through tectonic activity or post-glacial adjustment. A storm surge can be exacerbated through various factors. Subsidence of the land through tectonic activity or post-glacial adjustment. Removing natural vegetation. Mangrove forests are the most productive and complex ecosystems in the world. Mangroves also provide protection against extreme weather events like cyclones, which are very common in the Bay of Bengal. However, due to pressure for land space, much mangrove forest is destroyed for tourism, local industry, or housing planes. Global warming. As the surface of the ocean gets warmer, it is estimated that the frequency and intensity of storms will increase, so the severity of storm surges and flooding is also expected to increase. Consequences for communities. Some areas of the coast have significantly reduced house and land prices as the area becomes known as at significant risk. This can lead to economic loss for homeowners and local coastal economies. In the UK, many insurers don't provide home insurance for people living along coastlines that are at extreme risk of erosion or storm surges. Storm surges also damage the environment by destroying plant successions and damaging many coastal landforms. Depositional landforms, due to their unconsolidated nature, are most likely to be destroyed. Also, erosion may take place at accelerated rates or higher up the cliff face, which can increase the risk of collapse. Environmental refugees. Globally, more than 1 billion people live on coasts that are at risk of coastal flooding, and 50% of the world's population live within 200 kilometres of the coast. As storm surges and erosion along the coastline is predicted to increase, so too is the volume of environmental refugees displaced internally or internationally. People lose their homes, way of life and culture as they are forced to migrate to avoid the rising usostatic sea level and the rising risk of coastal flooding. Coastal management. Approaches to coastal management have greatly changed due to new knowledge and research about the positive and negative feedbacks that management can have on a coastline. New approaches have been created. Through the specific strategies can be mostly classified into two types, hard and soft engineering. Hard and soft engineering both relate to traditional approaches to coastal management. There is erosion occurring in this area, so let's build a beach or seawall to reduce the erosion. These approaches are a direct solution to the problem that is occurring. There are different approaches to managing coastal areas. Firstly, hold the line, manage realignment, advance the line, or do nothing. Factors looked at when deciding on which policy to use include the economic value of the asset that could be protected is looked at. For example, the importance of a natural gas terminal at Easington would be protected, however farmland and caravan parks wouldn't. The technical feasibility of the engineering solutions. For example, a seawall may not be possible for a certain location. The ecological and cultural value of land. For example, it may be desirable to protect historic sites or sites of scientific interest. Coastal decision making. Cost-benefit analysis. This is an analysis that is carried out before any form of coastal management takes place. The cost includes construction, demolition and maintenance, and is then compared to the expected benefit, like the value of land saved, homes and businesses protected. Costs and benefit include both tangible and intangible things. For a project to be given the go-ahead, the expected benefits have to outweigh the costs. The ICZM, the Integrated Coastal Zone Management. A coastal area, sediment cell, is managed as a whole. This often involves management between different political boundaries. The ICZM recognises the importance of coasts for people's livelihoods. The ICZM also recognises that coastal management must be sustainable, whereby economic development is important, but it shouldn't come at a cost for the environment. The ICZM must involve all stakeholders, plan for the long term and try to work with natural processes and not against them. Shoreline management plans. For each sediment cell in the UK, an SMP has to be created to help with coastal management. Each SMP identifies all of the activities, both natural and human, which occur within the coastline of each sediment cell. Sediment cells are considered to be closed systems for the purposes of management, although in reality there will be some exchanges between different cells. SMPs are recommended for all sections of England and Welsh coastlines by DEFRA, the governing body responsible for the majority of environmental protection in the UK. 4 options here are considered for each stretch of the coastline. Types of defences. Hard engineering. Hard engineering is very traditional and in many ways outdated approach to the coastal management, as it involves man-made structures that prevent erosion. They are often very effective at preventing erosion in the desired area, but are high cost, have significant environmental impact due to the use of concrete and other man-made materials. By reducing erosion in one area of the coastline, it may act to exacerbate erosion elsewhere. Therefore, the only impact is to change where erosion is occurring. Offshore breakwaters, groins and seawalls are all examples of hard engineering structures. Many of them are visually unappealing and are very expensive. Riprap or rock armour and revetment are also examples of hard engineering strategies to prevent coastal erosion. Soft engineering. Unlike hard engineering, soft engineering aims to work with and complement the physical environment by using natural methods as coastal defences. They are useful for protecting against sea level change as well as coastal erosion. Examples include beach nourishment, which builds up the beach, protecting the cliffs, and there is a potential for tourism there. However, it may have consequences on the local habitats. Cliff regrading and drainage. This reduces the angle of the cliff to help stabilise it, as a steeper cliff will be more likely to collapse. Dune stabilisation. Marram grass is planted. The roots behind help to bind the dunes, protecting the land behind it. And marsh creation, a type of managed retreat, allowing low-lying areas to flood. Sustainable coastal management. Aspects of managing coasts in a sustainable way include managing natural resources like fish, water and farmland to ensure long-term productivity, creating alternative livelihoods before people lose their existing jobs, educating communities about what they need and how to adapt, monitoring coastal changes and adapting or mitigating, and managing flood risks or relocating if needed. Conflict over policy decisions. When considering coastal management, there may be winners and losers. Winners can be classified as those who benefit economically, such as their homes or businesses are protected, environmentally, where their habitats are protected, and socially, community ties still remain in place. People still have jobs and so less stress and worrying. Losers can be classified who lose out, such as lose a property or lose a job or have to relocate elsewhere. Communities and homeowners have a strong attachment to a place, so losing their properties and their social networks is a great loss. This will make them financially worse off, and many people may feel lonely, are forced to move, and they may be angered if their area is chosen not to be protected. Business owners may be angered if nothing is done to protect them and their business, which could lose them profitability and regular clients. DEFRA funding has been reduced by central government since 2010, and so cannot invest in coastal management in all areas, and now have to prioritise their funding in most important locations. Some people feel aggrieved about this. However, there may be arguments which supports the decision for active no intervention. Coastal managers produce SMP for entire area, so they have to see what kind of impacts may have if the coast is managed in one specific area. Local authorities and DEFRA have had their budgets reduced as central government funding since 2010 has dropped and therefore cannot invest in coastal management in all areas. They have to prioritise their funding to the places that are most important. The impact of coastal management on sediment cells. Coastal management has a variety of impacts on sediment cells, and any form of intervention will cause some kind of impact. Installing a seawall would reflect wave energy downdrift, increasing wave energy and erosion elsewhere on the coastline. Less erosion occurs in these areas with the seawall, and so there is also less sediment in the areas with increased wave energy. Less sediment reduces beach size, so the cliff is more exposed to erosion from the higher energy waves. Building groins has the same effect on areas downdrift, as longshore drift can no longer transport sediment away from one stretch of coastline. And that is the end of this episode. I know it was a bit all over the place. Memory cards, dinner, lighting's changed, everything went wrong that could go wrong. So thank you for sticking with. I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, I hope you can take something away. Do subscribe down below, as the basics of coastal erosion, landforms, processes will be up on my channel shortly. So subscribe down below to see that. And yeah, I hope you've had a great day. I will see you soon. Bye guys.